A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Matthew Rhys and Tom Hanks. It's the second film featuring Fred Rogers in very recent memory, but this one does so in a new way. The documentary film, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which was released in 2018, was entirely focused on the man and his work. This film, however, has Fred Rogers only as a secondary character, a kind of catalyst for change for the protagonist of the film. So, for those of you who have grown up outside of the US, like myself, and don't know who Fred Rogers is or was, he was a long-time host of a children's television show called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The show featured himself and a number of other characters, including puppets, exploring feelings and emotions mostly. It was geared towards younger children, 4 to 6 years old, and its goal was to kind of normalize talking about feelings and to help those children learn how to process them. The program wasn't afraid of tackling serious subjects as well, like death, grief, illness, sadness, and anger that comes with it. And it always approached them with incredible delicacy and heart. Whole generations of Americans were raised watching it, and Fred Rogers has been a beloved, universally admired figure ever since. He was incredibly unique in that his calm, soft speaking, on screen persona was actually how he was in real life too. A very kind, warm, gentle person, always friendly and genuinely interested in the other person. I mean, it's kind of difficult to really explain him if you haven't seen him talk and interact with other people. If you want a better understanding of Fred Rogers, I would seriously recommend the mentioned documentary film Won't You Be My Neighbor. It's really excellent and it does a good job of painting his picture. So now that we know who he is, this film, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, is partly based on a real story of a journalist in the film named Lloyd Vogel, who gets an assignment to interview and profile Fred Rogers for a magazine series about American heroes. Vogel is like the last person you would send for the job. He is a jaded, cynical, washed up, angry person. He constantly gets in trouble both because of his aggressive writing and in personal life. So when he first meets Rogers, he doesn't believe him, essentially. He cannot comprehend that a man like this could exist and behave like that when the lights go out, when the cameras stop rolling. He is convinced initially that this is just a mask, this is just a public persona. So he spends more and more time with Rogers, slowly coming to the realization that he is genuine and real, and in turn, Rogers' interest and insight into Vogel's life helps him grow as a person. What he's beginning to learn from Rogers will help him turn his personal life around and find the good person inside of him that was there all along. So that's the synopsis of the film. And from that synopsis, you probably already know that Vogel is the focal point, our eyes in the story, and Fred Rogers is just a secondary character. But I was still surprised, especially with how much marketing seemed to be focusing on Fred Rogers, of how little of him there actually was in the film. Make no mistake, this movie really is about the journalist, first and foremost, which, as heartwarming and touching as that story, as that self-growth story is on paper, it's a shame, I think, because my favorite parts of the film and the ones that hit the hardest emotionally all involved the presence of Fred Rogers, played by Tom Hanks. And even though Hanks looks nothing like the real Mr. Rogers, he does a terrific kind of performance slash impersonation anyway. I think he nailed the way Rogers speaks. His calm and slow way of talking, his mannerisms, some of the facial expressions and movements. When I looked at him, I thought, okay, this is Tom Hanks playing a role. But when I closed my eyes for a second and just listened, this was suddenly Fred Rogers. And I feel that that voice, being such a recognizable part of Rogers, means that nailing this one element was very important, and I'm so glad it worked. However, I think that outside of that, outside of his presence in the film, the movie is rather uneven. There are moments which were really good, then there were moments where I got bored or disinterested. There's also a very weird kind of dream sequence in the middle which felt completely out of place in the film. In general, I found it kind of difficult to buy into the internal conflict of the protagonist. I don't exactly know what the reason was. Was it the writing or the acting or the pacing of the story? I don't know. But I do know that when Fred Rogers was not on the screen, the movie suffered. And so it's difficult for me to recommend it. I think it has individual great moments, but as a whole, it fails to engage or grip the audience enough. And I know some people are going to say, well, it's a story featuring Fred Rogers, you should have expected it to be slow and calm. But the thing is, again, the documentary Won't You Be My Neighbor, it exists, and even though it is a vastly different film, I think it manages to achieve some of the things that this one was also aiming for and missed. And so I think that the documentary is the much better one of the two.